All right, this is part 2 of 3.3 through 3.5. Whenever we left off, we were talking about how we're going to use angle relationships to find angle measures, and we talked about how each of the angle relationships worked algebraically. And then I gave you a hint to ask yourself if they're neighbors or not neighbors. And if they are neighbors, we know they're going to equal 180. If they're not neighbors, they're equal to each other. So let's practice doing that. So this is example 2. I provided 4 examples, 1 of each, and yes, these are all examples from your homework, okay? So remember, we're going to ask ourselves, neighbors or not neighbors? Okay, so we look at the first one here. Here's the angle we want to know. Here's the angle we know. Are they neighbors or not neighbors? And what I mean by this is, are they right next door to each other? Well, they're not. They are not neighbors. So the rule is, when they're not neighbors, that they're equal. So we can say that the question mark is equal to 101. Ta-da! Okay, let's look at this next one. I'm going to use a different color. All right, here's what we want to know. Here's what we know. Neighbors or not neighbors? Okay, they're far away from each other, so they're not neighbors. So remember, if they're not neighbors, they're equal to each other. So that means that the question mark is equal to 112. All right, next one. Okay. Here's what we want to know. Here's what we know. Are they neighbors or not neighbors? Now here's where people get a little confused. You're like, well, they're not as far away as the other ones, but they're not right next door to each other, so they're still not neighbors. And when they're not neighbors, they're equal. So we can say that question mark is equal to 70, not 100, 70. And let's look at this last one here. Here's what we want to know, and here's what we know. So, are we neighbors or not neighbors? Well, they're right next door to each other, so they are neighbors. And remember, when we're neighbors, we add to equal 180. So we would say, okay, this time, question mark plus 63 equals 180. And then how do we solve for our unknown question mark? Well, we subtract 63. So we get question mark is equal to, and we take our calculators, and we say 180 minus 63, and we get 117. And there we go. That is how we use our angles to find missing angle measures. Just remember, neighbors and not neighbors. Now, let's go ahead and take this a step further and talk about what we're going to do if we're dealing with algebra. The same rule applies, the neighbor, not neighbor rule. Okay? So remember, we're still going to use that rule. If they're neighbors, they're equal. Oh, sorry, equal to 180. If they're not neighbors, they're just equal. So let's go ahead and practice that one here with example 3, solving for x. So this time we're still doing the same rules, but we're going to have to solve for x. We're going to have to throw some algebra in there. So here's what we know. We know x plus 90, and we know 100. So my question is, are they neighbors or not neighbors? Well, they're right next door to each other, so they're definitely neighbors. And remember, if they're neighbors, they equal 180. So we would take our two angles, x plus 90 plus 100, and set it equal to 180. All right, now we're simply going to solve for x. Let's go ahead and do our variables and constants. So our only variable is x. Our constants are 180. That's already over here. We need to move this 90 over, so we're going to subtract 90. we need to move this 100, so we're going to subtract 100. And we get x equals, I'm going to take my calculator, and I'm going to say 180 minus 90 minus 100, and I get negative 10 as my answer. Ta-da! Now, of course, you can do solving for x by combining like terms and then subtracting 190. It would have been the absolute same answer. I'm just showing it this way, but you can do it that other way if you like. All right, let's look at our next one. We know 130, and we knew 17x minus 6. So, are we neighbors or not neighbors? We're pretty far away from each other here, so we're not neighbors. Remember, when we're not neighbors, we're equal to each other. So we can say 17x minus 6 is equal to 130. All right, let's go ahead and solve for x now. Variables, constants. So 17x is our only variable. Our constant is 130. Then I have this negative 6 I need to move over, so I'm going to add 6. That gives me 17x equals 136. Divide by 17. Alright, so I'm going to take my handy dandy calculator, do 136 divided by 17, and I get 8 as my answer. Alright, so just to let you know, the geometric part of all of this is setting up the equation, and then there's algebra that comes involved. Alright? So, the important part is knowing how to set it up, but we still have to solve, so you still got to do your algebra. All right, let's look at the next one. We know 12x plus 12, and we know 120. So my question is, neighbors or not neighbors? Well, they're far away from each other, so they are not neighbors. And remember, when we're not neighbors, we're equal to each other. So we would say 12x plus 12 equals 120. All right, let's solve for x by doing our variables and constants. So our variable, we have a 12x. I don't see any other variables. Over here, we have a 120. We also have a 12 we need to move over there by subtracting it. All right, so we're left with 12x equals, I'm going to take my calculator and do 120 minus 12. Gives me 108. All right, now to solve for x, we're going to divide by 12. Then take my calculator and take 108 and divide it by 12, and I get x equals 9. All right, and our last example for today, and the last one we're going to do, we know that this one is 55. And this one is x plus 65. Are we neighbors or not neighbors? Well, they are definitely not neighbors. They're the farthest away out of any of them. So not neighbors at all. And remember, when we're not neighbors, we're equal. So we can say x plus 65 equals 55. All right, let's go ahead and solve for x. This one, we don't really have to do constants and variables because there's only a single x. We just got to get it by itself. So we can subtract 65 to do so. So x equals negative 11, I do believe. Oh, sorry, negative 10. Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. What's new? All right, there we go. All right, so we have finished the notes. Do not forget to take a picture of your notes and submit them on Google Classroom. Do not forget to complete assignment 2. All of this is due by Sunday. I do hope that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you have any questions, feel free to remind message me. I don't get my Google Classroom notes when I'm at home. Remind's the best way to do it. And if I am available, I will answer your questions. So have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and thank you for all your hard work.